Centering prayer as a path to our deepest and most authentic self. Hello, I'm Carole Whittaker, and I've been invited to share some ideas and thoughts with you on this topic. I first met centering prayer in 1994, at a time in my life where everything that could fall apart was falling apart. My sense at that time and in the ensuing years has been that centering prayer saved my life. It brought me back to life. In that time since 1994, I've had an increasing interest in how it is that our human lives unfold, particularly in relationship to spirituality and to grace, and in response to the drive of human evolution. So in sharing some of those ideas with you, I'd like to share a screen with a PowerPoint presentation that will help us to image and visualize some of the things that we're going to speak about. The theological foundation of centering prayer is the indwelling presence of the divine, the indwelling presence of God. And so I'd like to begin there with sort of an idea or an image of this whole realm where we speak of God and the divine. This beautiful painting was from Ansgar Homburg, and it speaks of God's ecstasy. Franciscans would see this as God's fountain fullness overflowing, or as God as person community. So this realm of the divine, sometimes referred to as the causal realm, is the foundational open realm of love. It's intrinsically about relationship. It's what the Christian tradition recognizes and names as Trinity. And within this divine realm, there arises the possibility, the potentiality of all things, sometimes referred to as the spiritual realm, sometimes as the subtle realm. It certainly is the realm of consciousness, of qualities of essence, of potentiality. I think it's also referred to and seen as the logoic realm, the realm of the Word of God, which will become flesh. And it's from within the divine, within this spiritual subtle realm, that the universe comes into being, that it breaks forward in the form of matter energy in space-time. So we refer to this as the cosmos, the psychic realm, or just simply to nature. And it is within this realm that our human lives unfold. So here's a bit of a perspective. Let's tell a bit of the universal, the story of the universe. Part one. Part one of the universe story is just simply matter energy manifesting in space-time. And it begins to take form. It takes form in galaxies, clusters of matter that condense into stars, where the stars are very busy generating hydrogen atoms, and from hydrogen atoms bringing forth heavier atoms of helium and carbon and whatever. And of second generation systems of stars, of reforming new stars that also bring together planetary systems. What we see in this part of the universe unfolding is atoms being generated within the stars, and then forming together into relationship with one another in developing molecules. So we see just from this very beginning look at the universe unfolding, we see that the universe organizes itself. It brings forward its own laws of physics, of chemistry, of probability and possibility. The universe is self-organizing, and it contains both stability and chaos. Stability that gives it some measure of being able to be reliable and predictable, and moments of chaos where things can fall apart and where something new can enter in. It's the realm in which matter emerges from energy and returns to energy. Matter and energy as two forms of the same element, where we see that which is potential becoming actual in the world of space-time, and returning back into the realm of potentiality. Part two of the universe is when biological life emerges. So our own planet, our planetary system, is at least a second, if not a third generation a system from our stars. And about a billion years into the life of our planet Earth, we had very simple cells form. We call these bacteria. There, where we had molecules becoming living matter, where molecules that were in the form of a double helix unzipped the relationship between them, and each regrew the other half. That suddenly molecules began to manifest the qualities that we recognize as biological life. These simple cells went on organizing themselves and coming into being in the form of different kinds of bacteria for a couple of billion years, until they discovered how to form a more complex cell, very much larger, a cell that contained a nucleus and mitochondria. And again, after a billion years, close to 2 billion years, cells began to group themselves within colonies. Colonies of cells group themselves together into what we call organs. We have colonies of cells within the human body that group together as the organ of the heart, the organ of the brain, the organ of the skin. And organs cooperate with one another in developing integrated organisms, unified life beings, plants and animals of all kinds of form and variety. Part three of the universe story, a part that we're familiar with on our planet Earth, is the awakening of consciousness. The awakening of consciousness as we see a development of a reptilian brain responsible for instinctual energies, an autonomic nervous system that is able to respond to fight, flight, or freeze, that regulates bodily functions, develops a mammalian limbic brain, a limbic brain that is able to detect emotions, particular feelings in the body that have meaning, that monitor social behavior, that give us a sense of relationship with others. And then the development of a neocortex, the brain which in the human is responsible for our thinking, for language, for awareness, for self-consciousness. So just looking at the cosmos itself, it reveals some of its particular qualities, that it's self-organizing, it moves towards the expansion of life, of consciousness and freedom, that the cosmos itself is intelligent, that it is about relationship, that the whole cosmos is not a thing so much as it is a process of unfolding and becoming, and that it's not finished. It always continues to become and unfold. And as we get closer to the human, we see that the cosmos reflects, embodies, manifests qualities of its divine source, of love and life, goodness, truth, beauty, qualities that are rooted all the way down to our source in our divine source itself. As an individual human, we begin as one of these single complex cells. And in the period of gestation, the 9 months of our coming to be, it simply is incredible to me that during that period we incorporate the history of matter since the beginning of the cosmos. We incorporate the physical laws of matter and energy, physics and chemistry. We embody and recapitulate all of the stages of development of life on Earth for the last 2 billion years. The genes are the instruction manual for doing this. It's astonishing that within 9 months that we go through what initially took 2 billion years to unfold. That as humans, that we then differentiate from a collective consciousness in order to develop a sense of our individual reflective consciousness, which leads to what appears to us to be a separate self. It's not separate, it is individuated, it is differentiated, but it is not actually separate. It is an illusion of separateness. And in which, by the time we are born, we learn to adapt to our culture in order to survive, in which the memes, little units of culture, become the instruction manual for how we need to behave. So I like to trace this unfolding of our own individual development. And it began with this image that came to me a number of years on a long retreat. My question on the retreat was, what is this core self I keep hearing about? What is this soul self or essence or dynamic ground that I keep hearing about? And as I began to play with that imaginatively with the box of crayons, this image sort of appeared and came up. It needed to be 3 and it needed to be dynamic. And so it's simply an image. You can discover and draw your own, in which it gives me a sense of what is the point of origin of the individual human person, this little one cell of consciousness that is going to be embodied. So this core self then is our point of origin, or the source of our individuality as a human person, but it is connected to and embodies the divine presence and its qualities, and embodies all of the potentials that we have of a human person, of that which we might be able to grow into and manifest. So the universe story at this point of the entry of the human tells us that we as humans exist in relationship to the whole, that we are the result of, we're connected to, and we're representative of the whole, and that we're not done. We're in process. We're not finished. And although we are insignificant in terms of time and space, we have the capacity to remember and to respond to our divine source that dwells at the core of our being. Rumi was a Sufi mystic who lived in the 13th century, in the 1200s. And this was well before we had any scientific knowledge of these things. And it amazes me that he knew and understood this from his own direct inner understanding. We began as a mineral. We emerged into plant life and into the animal state, and then to being human. And always we have forgotten our former states, except in early spring, when we dimly recall being green again. This is how a young person turns toward a teacher, or how a baby leans toward the breast, without knowing the secret of its desire, yet turning instinctively. So humankind is being led along an evolving course through this migration of intelligences, as though we seem to be sleeping. There is an inner wakefulness that directs the dream. It will eventually startle us back to the truth of who we are. It's also resonant of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things came into being. Not one thing came into being except through him. What has come into being in him was life, life that was the light of men, and light shines in the darkness, and darkness cannot overpower it. I'd like to speak a little bit now about how it is from the time that we are born that we begin to develop and interact initially with the world. And so as soon as we're born into the world, our senses, our five senses, seeing, touching, tasting, feeling, smelling, begin to kick in. And we get the sense by observing, by feeling mother's finger or biting my own finger, by pulling mother's hair or pulling my own hair. The sensations of my body tell me that I am a body, that I am a different body than my mother's body, because it feels different when I bite her finger or I bite my finger. So our first entry into understanding the world is through our five senses. Early on, certainly by the time we're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, our limbic center begins to kick in. And we recognize that we have things that we feel in our body that tell us something about our relationship with others, and tell us something about the meaning of what that feeling is in our body. And so we develop the recognition that I am a child, that's a brother, mother, father, teacher, playmate. And so the whole world of relationship and the role in which I play within relationship begins to kick in and become manifest. Early on, they begin teaching me, all of my caregivers, they teach me to speak. And after learning how to speak, it begins to generate the centers of thinking within my mind. I develop memories of my own experience in the world. I learn how to plan for the future. I see images and use images in order to understand my world. And so by the time I'm maybe 10, 11 years old, then I have a whole region of my own thoughts and memories and plans and images. And this lets me identify as being an individual rational self, an egoic self. So look, by the time I'm 20 years old, I've already moved from identifying with being a body to identify with being many different roles in my life, to identifying as being an individual, a rational, egoic, knowing, thinking self. We form our own consciousness into a real structure in which the dynamic instinctual energy, which is contained within our bodies, then generates experiences of emotion. Negative emotions are called passions, and the negative emotions form neural pathways. These become patterns of neurological firing within our brains, and in which our thinking, our perspective on the world, our worldview, everything that goes on within our mental center, likewise becomes an habitual pattern. And this diagram is intended to indicate that we take our life force energy and that we direct our attention towards that which holds our habits of emotion in place, that holds our habits of thinking in place. And this gives us a stable structure for a personality that is able to get along in the world. So here we have energy being directed into constructing a personality, an ego personality. And this has enormous benefits. It's taken 13.8 billion years for the universe to bring this forward, at least on our planet. And this gives us the benefit of an individual consciousness, of self-reflective consciousness that came into um, full human play only about 2,500, 3,000 years ago. It gives us a sense of our social belonging. Having said that, those of you who are over 50 or 60 may be particularly attuned to this. We come to the place where what has been so useful and helpful to us in bringing us to self-reflective consciousness and into belonging has now sort of become a cage, because our movement within here becomes automatic and habitual. It becomes reactive. It becomes unconsciously reactive. And it becomes a barrier to allowing all of the inner qualities that are already within us, within us. It does not allow those to come into manifestation in our everyday world, which is being completely, our energy is being used up by all of our habitual patterns. So from this perspective, this is one of the places in which I have seen, I believe that I have seen that centering prayer has a very strong effect on our very structure of our personality. Here at this place where we are generating our life force energy and moving it across to patterns, in centering prayer, one of our very first instructions is simply to bring ourselves into a place of quiet and silence. That is to bring our presence in, draw our presence inward, to draw our attention inward, and to sit simply in a place of stillness, in a place of quiet. And my sense is that exercise, that part of the exercise in centering prayer, allows this structure to relax and to open up. So this is what it might look. Yes, I understand that this is very much just a model, but as we begin to relax the pattern, then relaxing the pattern allows the energy to come directly into our hearts and into our minds and actually manifest within our everyday walk around town kind of consciousness. And so this movement, this opening of the center of ourselves to allow that grace which is always already there, to allow that presence of the indwelling presence of the divine source, which is always already there, allow it to come into our bodies and hearts and minds. And it really has amazing, amazing effects. It frees us from the habitualness of our passion and fixation. It allows the flow of our life force to experience qualities. These qualities look very, very much like the fruits of the Spirit that are described by St. Paul in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 5. And it enhances greatly our capacity to love and to relate to others. So what are the paths of freedom and wholeness? Well, it has to do with the integration of our body and mind, our minds and our hearts. It has to do with an integration of intuition and reason and feelings. It has to do with awakening awareness and the inner observation of that which is always already there, but is not within the realm of our knowing in the ordinary world. Certainly, meditation and contemplative prayer, spiritual direction, liturgical celebration and ritual, chewing the scriptures and Lectio Divina. But it's within this context then that we may see that where we begin or appear to begin our little lives, newly born as little bodies, that our senses become the gift of knowing and interacting with the world. And then our mind develops. We get a sense of reason, of rationality, of using our mind to figure out problems, the philosopher's gift, which has brought forth all art, culture, technology over the course of our human development. And these are faculties that we have and develop very quickly in our human lives. What goes a bit into the background and needs to be reawakened is the direct knowing of our soul. Our souls know in a direct sense, particularly by a feeling or a sense within the body. This has been referred to as the shaman's gift. But it also is possible and within our reach for us to know spirit to spirit, the gift of the mystic, of knowing within the realm of science, of silence itself. And so, again, centering prayer certainly begins with the body, but brings us to a place of sitting in silence and receptivity that allows a capacity for our soul and spirit to develop in its way of knowing. So as we come back to centering prayer then, centering prayer, which in its essence is a practice of resting in God, a consent to God's presence and action within our lives. So centering prayer then represents listening to God, a wordless, trusting opening of ourselves to our divine presence. It incorporates our interior silence. It's a simple resting in divine presence. It has elements of relaxation and letting go and letting be and self-emptying. And it develops, in my experience, it develops trust in and consent to the divine presence. Another way of looking at this or viewing this, and here in this little diagram at the bottom, in the middle, we see the self, and the self that moves its attention outward in order to interact with the world. That's all kinds of interactions, everything that we do in relationship to our physical world. And how it's also possible to gather our attention inward and turn that self with a gathered attention to simply sit in silence and quiet. And what happens there is that the self begins to attune or to resonate with the indwelling spirit deep within its own heart, to receive in the form of a felt sense or an intuition the presence and energy of that inner spirit. So I think it works something a little bit like this, but this could be, the influence of studying too much chemistry and working with diagrams. But this does seem clear. Centering prayer was not developed as a practice in order to lead to purity of heart. It came pure and clear and clean out of the Christian tradition of the early centuries of the 8th century and then the 14th century. But the practice of centering prayer that came forward in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, it was observed that centering prayer opens the heart, that it opens the heart to become its own inner eye, its own organ of perception of the inner world. And it was observed that the long-term effect of centering prayer was purity of heart. And that, of course, rings blessedly with us, with Jesus teaching on the Beatitudes. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. We have seen now over time that the long-term practice of centering prayer can lead us to new pathways of thinking and of feeling. And so in short, I think that the centering prayer is a really, really simple practice. It doesn't put us directly in God's presence. It's a very simple practice that puts us in a place where our capacity to open and resonate to God's presence can be actualized. This is a wonderful quote from Father Keating, and we'll end here. We are summoned into the presence of God by the fact of our birth, but we become present to God only by our consent. As our faculties and our capacities to relate gradually develop and unfold, the capacity to enter into a relationship with God increases, and each new depth of presence requires a new consent. Each new awakening to God changes our relationship to ourselves and everything and everyone else. So if this is helpful to you, I'm pleased. I'm glad if this is helpful to you. If it's not, just ignore it. But in ignoring it, please stay faithful to the practice of centering prayer. It's putting yourself in the place where you're in relationship with Spirit in such a way that whatever it is that wants to form within you and deepen in your relationship with your divine source will take wings and flourish. And so I wish you many blessings on this day, many blessings on this day, and I'll meet you in the quiet. Thank you.